We've had a request to allow Dr. Grant Gilmore to speak. Grant?
I think the previous three speakers have to be commended. Paul, Mark, and Walter. These people have a livelihood on the lagoon and on Oslo Road. I applaud all of you for representing humanity. And that's important. But what I would like to address are other constituents in each of your districts. You all have fish in your districts. Some of you have more than others.
We got catfish.
They can't vote, but I'm here to represent them. Now, I could have picked raccoons or other things that I know are in your districts as well, but we don't eat raccoons yet, and I think the fish are supporting some diets here and livelihoods. Now, the fish I'm going to talk about, I was going to bring a small lapel pin that's the shape of a spotted sea trout, but if you can see that little silver piece on my pin, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the little guys. A canoe is huge for them. You know, we don't care. They don't care about the size of the tires or the trailer. And I'm going to tell you what they care about. And I want to read into the record, so I want it to be accurate. Your efforts at Oslo Road are to increase human use of the boat ramp and the road through paving the road, constructing a parking lot, and a water holding pond. You said you did not want larger boats, just more boats, and a paved road and parking lot, removal of a little over an acre of mangrove habitat, and dredging 300 cubic yards, from what I understand, of sediment to a depth of 3 feet out to 210 feet from the present ramp. And that could be inaccurate, but it's approximate. I know of no other location in Florida where a critical fishery nursery site, essential fish habitat, has not been negatively impacted by increased human use, even if it's by more small power boats. And I'll tell you why. And we're talking about nursery sites, we're talking about fish even smaller than this lapel pin. And I noticed some smiles when Bob Solari said something about sound. I was sent this paper last week on the larvae of mangrove snapper actually communicate to each other. This is a fish a half-inch in size using sound. Not only that, they cue in on their settlement habitat, oyster reefs and mangroves, based on the sound of those habitats. And we know that reef fish now use sound to settle on reefs. So you got to keep in mind, you got to enter that small Lilliputian world of the fish, okay? And it's extremely important to the fishery. The spotted sea trout produces 1 million eggs. The night we listen to it, one trout will produce 1 million eggs, a large trout, and come back 2 weeks later, do it again. How many of those eggs are surviving? Not many. Now, the 4 fishery species that routinely use Oslo Road are the most valuable inshore fishery species in Florida waters. They're the spotted sea trout, red drum, redfish, snook, and tarpon. During my 27-year tenure at Harbor Branch, I and my team of students, research assistants, captured and weighed and measured many fish from this wonderful, productive lagoon. And we made many discoveries that have been blatantly, unfortunately, and blatantly endured by this commission, because we've related them to you. I never captured young of the year snook, red drum, and all those collections in the vicinity of Harbor Branch. They did not settle there, or at many other locations examined over the years throughout the lagoon. But we found very special locations where they did settle, typically no more than 2 or 3 of these species at the same location. Oslo is the only site that I've found that attracts all 4 of these species, major fishery species, to the same critical nursery site. Now, what is a nursery site? It's hard for even an experienced fisherman to understand how valuable and rare these sites are, as he can put his boat in and travel to many different locations in the lagoon to catch adult snook or trout. However, I can put my boat in and go to many locations to capture 1 inch or less snook or trout, and these locations are very rare. What are these small, young predators looking for? Their two needs are primary for these fish. They're looking for a place where they can escape predation, particularly from their parents. Very, very shallow water. And a place where they can find sufficient prey to grow rapidly so they can fend for themselves in the deeper water further offshore. As pointed out by the county attorney, Oslo and the waters at Oslo Ramp are shallow. And that was discussed as if it was a detriment. Well, to us it is. To a little trout, it's the place. And now we know through not only my research but that of others, state biologists throughout the state, and has been sampling the seagrasses, that very sparse seagrass is a prime settlement site for spotted sea trout. Sparse shoalgrass. It just happens that that seagrass is adapted to very shallow water. So it's not the thick grass that these juvenile trout are hunting for. Okay, and we've been discussing thickness of seagrass beds, and I'll tell you what the trout thinks about it. Okay, I'll try to relate this stuff with the trout. And the point being made that more and more research is coming out. We can talk about 1977, 1970, whatever, but we have more discoveries now than ever before. You're going to hear from Aaron Adams, who can also address this issue later. Another very good scientist who's made these discoveries. Dredging the shoreline bottom deeper than a few inches, even a few feet from shore, eliminates trout and redfish nursery habitat along that shore. So the original boat ramp did that damage, but no one knew any of this at that time. It wasn't known. You now know it. We do know it. Spotted sea trout and redfish are seeking the shallow nearshore seagrass habitats at Oslo. Now we know that because we capture them there. There's healthy seagrass growing at Oslo. Various species of macroalgae also grow there and also form indigenous food and habitat needed by various seagrass fish and invertebrate species, which also serve as food for these guys. Now they're looking for food as well. The seagrass at Oslo is not being harmed by water running off a shell marl substrate of Oslo Road any more than it is at the thousands of marl shell carbonate shorelines throughout South Florida. I say this, Florida is shell. South Florida is shell and carbonate. And I've lived on dirt roads all my life. They do form these whitings, or this white material that comes off during the rain. Believe it or not, that's received study over the last 30 or 40 years. They call them whitings. They've been studied in Florida Bay. They've been studied in the Bahama Islands. It's a precipitate that occurs in the water column. It's ephemeral. And believe it or not, it does not harm seagrass, or there wouldn't be any seagrass in Florida Bay or on those flats in the Bahamas. And that's what we're seeing coming off the shell. Water has been washing off shell and coral substrates for millions of years in Florida. Okay, and they're called whitings. It does not cause the death of seagrass, as the county has maintained. All of South Florida is made of this shell, coral substrate, rain running off native sediments. Why do these fish pick some sites and reject others? This is still under study, and we really don't know in many respects. But chosen sites must certainly give the fish a survival advantage. Our research and that of others has effectively demonstrated homing and larval and juvenile fish to very specific locations. The chair of this county commission, Peter O'Brien, who I hired to work with me 30 years ago, worked on the impoundment at Round Island, which is a research example of this homing. We showed that that particular location had nursery sites. And the South Culvert, at that impoundment, we collected 600 juvenile fish and one net pool there. Now, if you're familiar with that 40-acre wetland, which is a county reserve, it's next to the Round Island boat ramp on the other side of the lagoon from Oslo. We thought, well, if we put a culvert in the north side and a mile up the dike, which is the culvert you see adjacent to the boat ramp today, that the snook will go through there. And they didn't. Snook didn't recruit there. So we actually hadn't asked the snook where they wanted to go. We were just telling them where to go. And they decided they didn't want to go there. And it's the same situation today. They recruit back to that south culvert. And ironically, we lost tarpon habitat at that north culvert. It was a hole there, and tarpon do not like a direct connection to the lagoon at their nursery site. They like deeper basins where they could survive, and they abandoned that location. So we did away with tarpon habitat and didn't produce snook habitat. We had the same results further south during the same time period at Jack Island State Park. We collected an unbelievable number, 1,500 snook in 3 hours going through a single culvert in the culvert trap. And that, in the vicinity of that particular location, we also collected 3,000 juvenile snook. Well, there were 8 other culverts in that impoundment. They weren't using the other culverts, just that north culvert. Now, we put those culverts in so snook and other fish could enter that impoundment. That was telling us, just as Round Island study was telling us, that they're very specific settlement sites. Later on, we found the charts for the Old Indian River Inlet, and the Old Indian River Inlet margin came right through that north culvert site. There's more and more evidence that there's possibly chemical cues now that allow these fish to zero in on very specific sites. And they don't have to be very large sites. And they crowd into these sites and utilize them. The snook, in the case of snook, a few months until it can grow to a sufficient size to enter deeper water. So we think that the snook had been homing in on the chemistry of a specific site long before we arrived to conduct our studies. We could not create a snook settlement site. They settled at the same relatively small site year after year. And we can go to Oslo, and I can show you if you want to around Thanksgiving, the first 2 weeks of December. And we couldn't create a site. They chose the site. It's where mitigation doesn't always work. And mitigation of Spoil Island as an alternative site for these specific species of fish is not likely to work. Not every mangrove and not every seagrass bed is a nursery site for these important fishery species, and we have to keep that in mind. However, every mangrove and every seagrass meadow saturates with the prey of these species. Right now we have high water in the lagoon. Mosquito fish are breeding like mad. They're increasing their population substantially right now. That water level is going back down. It's concentrating those mosquito fish, and guess what the snook recruits like to eat? A half-inch snook will sit under a female mosquito fish and eat as it's giving birth to neonates. Okay? That's a predator. And that predator wants to grow as quickly as possible, which he does, so he can eat more mosquito fish and other fish and not be eaten by his parents. Okay? I worked for the Indian River County Commission of Amalie Loy and Bill Watke as the first biologist to survey the natural resources of every spoil island in Indian River County. These islands are not nursery sites for these fish I'm talking about. At least we haven't found them to be nursery sites for these 4 species of fish. I'm not sure that I believe some of you were likely in high school, possibly grade school. I'm not talking about you. At that time, 35, 40 years ago. I don't know where you were.
I was reading about you.
I knew or was personal friends of commission chairs over the years. And this begins with Pat Lyons, Maggie Bowman, Fran Adams, Ken Mock, Ruth Stainbridge, Gary Wheeler, and others, working with them to protect and enhance the aquatic habitats and fisheries of the county and the lagoon at large. And I'm ready to do it now. I've tried. This is the first commission I've encountered that has ignored some of the best scientific evidence. I know you want to serve humanity, but we also have humanity involved with this project, and nobody would be in this room with me, like last time I talked to you. It is also interesting to note that 3 of the county commissions surrounding this county, Brevard County, Martin, and St. Lucie, have asked me to help them on the same fishery enhancement issues associated with habitat that my own home county, and I've lived in this county for 42 years, 43 years, however it is, Indian River has so readily ignored. You're very lucky you have a healthy ecosystem in at least the southern portion of this county that you, unfortunately, so steadfastly want to impact in some way. Okay? Permits were denied by the federal state agencies on several occasions, but have recently been reversed. This is very difficult to understand, particularly when the value of essential fish habitat at Oslo Road has increased substantially because so much fishery habitat, essential fish habitat, has recently been lost from one end of this lagoon to the other. There are commercial trout fishermen that no longer go to Brevard County to catch trout. There are guides that don't go that way, and you've heard from them. This loss not only affects the economy of local entities, it's not just the fishermen, it'll be real estate, but has interstate impacts. The tarpon, and you'll hear about the tarpon from Aaron, I hope, leaving Indian River County nurseries, tarpon leaving our nurseries here, and those larval tarpon were first described by Bob Harrington, who worked at the Oslo lab. Okay, the tarpon leave here and enter, as they mature, adult populations that spawn in the Florida Keys, and then they migrate to Virginia. So your nursery site at Oslo is feeding an interstate or a national fishery, not just a local fishery. Snook have been tagged at Cape Canaveral. They showed up in the Florida Keys. Four and Stewart showed up in Fort Myers. Now that we're tagging these guys, we know they move. Trout don't move that far. The largest spawning aggregation of spotted sea trout south of the Cape Canaveral, and I don't know how they're doing at Cape Canaveral now, is from the Moorings Flats, Oslo, down to Harbor Branch. Well documented. All you do is listen to NPR, go catch the trout at Blue Hole, at the Moorings Flats. And I don't know what sound does to their spawning. Last month, my colleagues discovered additional seagrass meadow disappearance from several miles in Martin County. Actually, up from Martin County, from, if you know where Conky Joe's is, north into St. Lucie County, there was no seagrass on the west shore. Now, we went there because I'd always been able to go to that spot as a control site where there was always seagrass. Always there. I'm talking about 40 years of collecting, okay? It's not there. It's gone. It disappeared in the last few months. So, why does this commission want to negatively impact through increased human boat traffic, just increased traffic? You're not going to increase the size of the ramp. I don't care about the tires. I'm looking at this thing from the standpoint of the fish, okay? One of the last remaining major fishery nurseries for spotted sea trout, red drum, snook, and tarpon in this lagoon. Now, we don't have much habitat here. All the surveys done over the years and years have showed that over 90% of the mangroves in the state of Florida are on the west coast. We have very little habitat here. And hopefully you're going to hear from a scientist here that has spent a good bit of his career studying the Gulf Coast and can address that. So I've asked this question, like Mark mentioned as well, many times, and was told by the commissioner our question is, why pursue this? And of course I'm asking from the fish's point of view. You got to take that part of your constituency into account because it affects the other part, the humanity. And so that's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Gilmore.
Thank you. Gentlemen, any questions of Grant?
Yeah.
Commissioner
Thanks for
Fletcher?
the opportunity. Doc, I appreciate your being here. And you asked a question earlier about what we were doing when we were 17. I was reading about you, okay? All right? That was part of my misspent youth, and I've gone in a different direction. But I want you to know I grossly admire what you do, okay? You made an offer a while back about us taking a boat ride. It was during a time where we really had some constraints upon our actions. There was litigation taking place, and you were
expert witness.
part of the parcel process, and I felt that that was a violation. Okay? That was my decision. But we no longer have that. That decision has already been made. So, and again, you heard earlier that I don't spend much time on boats. I don't own one, rent one, lease one, and I've been on one boat in maybe 10 years. But I missed an opportunity to be on a boat, didn't I?
You did, but if you'd like to wade...
I did already. It was up to you. I was going like this.
No, these guys aren't in that water. They're in the shallow water. And Thanksgiving and 2 weeks, 3 weeks thereafter, if you want to see what a little redfish and a little juvenile snook look like, we can go do it.
The challenge with that is, though, is that's past that 21 days that the clock is ticking. Okay?
Yeah.
And I'd like to know that, too, because I believe there is when we have a major decision to
Well,
make.
see, this is where we should have asked the fish ahead of time.
You think maybe we can...
They're on their clock. They're not on our clock.
I understand that, but do you want to take... Do you want to take a little stroll down the lane?
You can, but the guys I'm talking about aren't going to be there. Now, there will be juvenile tarpon back there coming up for air. You'll be able to see them. But the trout has stopped their spawning and their settlement. They do that during the summer. Okay. The snook are still spawning, but those youngsters aren't going to show up in large numbers until next month.
But I think us being together in that water might have a good impact.
Sure. Let's go ahead and do that.
I got a chance to meet, like Eugenie Clark, too, who I studied, but you... So, would you like to do that in the very near future?
Yes, sure.
Right?
I sure would.
We'll make sure
And
there's no
that
sharks in the
not only goes for
area.
you, that goes for anybody else that wants to get their feet wet. Yeah.
All right, then you and I have an appointment.
We have an appointment.
We're doing it.
Okay.
Thank you.